A quick new idea daily from the world's greatest TEDx talks. I'm your host, Atossa Leoni, and this is TEDx Shorts. Many school districts across the United States struggle with diversity. But even within those that educate youth of varying racial, ethnic, or gender identities, how successful is it in bridging cultural and socioeconomic divides? Prudence L. Carter is currently a dean and professor in the Graduate School of Education at UC Berkeley. She shows that diversity is not enough to build a more equitable society. We need to understand social and cultural conditions to close the gap between students.
Several years ago, I decided to go back to high school after many years. And I visited 8 high schools in 2 countries, this country and South Africa. All of these schools were relatively high-performing schools. Half of them were schools attended by students predominantly of color. Half of them were white-dominant schools. I noticed several things. I noticed, for example, that I, nervously, had to make decisions about where to sit when I visited the school cafeteria. Sometimes that happened in the teachers' lounges. Because you see, kids were actually dividing themselves according to different social lines. I noticed that when I entered the upper echelon of courses in these high schools, the courses that presumably were preparing kids for the rigors of college and university, I saw very few kids who looked like me, African American or Latino. I also noticed in some of these schools that baseball and cheerleading were to white boys and white girls, respectively, while basketball and step dancing were to black boys and black girls, respectively. This was curious to me. We're often uncomfortable moving across our social and cultural comfort zones, aren't we? And so what I chose to do as a sociologist, putting my hat on, is I wanted to understand what were the factors in a school context that would facilitate the ability for kids to cross academic, social, and cultural boundaries. And so I developed a survey. And on this survey, I asked kids about their friendship preferences. I asked them, how much of a difference would it make for you to have a friend who was of a different race or ethnicity, religion, gender, who had different cultural and social tastes from you? And here's what I found. Context matters. And context mattered in different ways. First of all, those kids who were engaged in some of the most rigorous and hands-on courses reported higher levels of what I call cultural flexibility from this scale. I also noticed that the kids, particularly among white students, those living in the northern states, reported higher cultural flexibility than those who were living in the southern states. But here's the one I want to focus on the most. I recognized that among African American students, those who were attending the majority minority schools that were not as affluent reported higher levels of cultural flexibility than the kids in the school that were presumed to be more diverse and more affluent. And that posed a conundrum for me. Seriously, a paradox, if you will. Because it is true that many students come from very disparate contexts when it comes to their family backgrounds. Yet at the same time, if we want them to move up the proverbial ladders to college and university, they need the resources invested. Resource-rich educational opportunities and contexts are absolutely necessary. They're not sufficient when it comes to many groups of kids who need to be incorporated. I found in my research that we also have to concentrate on the social and cultural environment of the school if we want to understand more effectively how to move kids from the margins to the center of education. So you see, here's the second part of that conundrum, that paradox, is that African American students who were attending schools and came from backgrounds just like the kids who were attending the more affluent schools were actually doing better and reported higher levels of cultural flexibility, were more deeply engaged because in their schools they were enrolled in the higher echelon courses, the advanced courses. They were going to Model UN. They were participating in debate club. They were traveling with the chorus and the band. They weren't segregated. And that explained a lot of what I was seeing. And so the study actually showed to me that diversity is not enough to get to integration. Diversity is about demographic change. Integration is about cultural and organizational change. One of the students, I'll call him Judah, who attended one of these affluent high schools, his mother and his father wanted him to have an excellent education, just like many parents do. But Judah and his peers suffered. There was a strong academic gap in their high school. And so Judah and his colleagues, while they were in rich, resource-rich schools, were not necessarily aspiring and reaching as far as many of their peers and classmates. So from all of this research, I tend to ask myself and I tend to ask educators, when you're teaching kids from different backgrounds, do you consider how you create communities of difference that bring all students toward the center? How aware are you about the limitations of your own cultural knowledges and what's there and what's not there? I also ask, how aware are we symbolically about how we create lines within our schools separating the us from the them? These are the kinds of things that we as researchers know. In fact, social psychologists, my colleagues here at Stanford, Jeff Cohen and Greg Walton, have found that the more students feel that they belong in an educational context, the better they perform. Which is why I found in some schools that kids who were just like the ones I was studying in the more diverse and affluent schools were really doing much better. And what I have come to conclude from my research is that we can all shift the tides of social and educational inequality if we provide ample resources and opportunities, if we cultivate culturally flexible minds, and if we come with empathic hearts.
The TEDx talk you just listened to was recorded in Stanford, California. All TEDx events are independently organized by volunteers who believe in TED's mission of ideas worth spreading. Special thanks to the organizing team at TEDxStanford. Want to listen to more TEDx talks? Explore the entire archive on the TEDx YouTube channel. I'm Atossa Leoni. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.